Hello, and welcome to my podcast entitled The Wright Experience. I'm Dr. William T. Wright Jr., the founder and host of this show. This month, February is here, and I'm celebrating my 1-year anniversary for the beginning of this show. Last February, we launched this vision, not expecting it to be as large as it has become, and I'm certainly grateful for your continued support of this show and what we're trying to do. As time continues, it is the mission of this podcast to stretch the envelope. I want this podcast to become a resource for future leaders to learn from, as well as the community at large. Our focus initially has been on educational leaders, and we've begun to feature some amazing guests from other disciplines. I'm committed to continuing to seek the very best leaders that I can find. Please don't hesitate to contact us with leaders that you'd like to see appear on this podcast as well. By all means, when you hear something that you like, please drop us a comment, click like, subscribe if you're a YouTube viewer, etc. Tonight is episode 45 of The Wright Experience. My guest tonight holds a very important role in working with school districts, aside from his regular job, to ensure that children can receive education in the best environment possible from a safety and health standpoint. I met him at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic as school districts were faced with trying to discover how to best deal with the challenges from a medical perspective. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to talk with him for this week's show. My guest is Dr. Michael J. Smith. Dr. Michael J. Smith, MD, MCSE, is a professor of pediatrics and the Interim Division Chief of Pediatric Infectious Diseases at Duke University School of Medicine. During the pandemic, Dr. Smith has been an investigator for multiple vaccine clinical trials, including the Pfizer studies in both adults and children. He also serves as the Duke Principal Investigator for the CDC's Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment COVID Vax Project. Dr. Smith is a faculty member of the ABC Science Collaborative, which is a partnership between Duke University, the University of North Carolina, and more than 50 school districts across the state of North Carolina, and it pairs scientists and physicians with school and community leaders to help them understand the most current and relevant data about COVID-19 so they may make decisions to keep us all safe as teachers, staff, and children. In addition to his research about COVID in the school setting, Dr. Smith has 2 school-age children of his own. Dr. Smith completed medical school at the Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons and his pediatric residency at Hasbro Children's Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. He completed fellowship training in pediatric infectious diseases at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where he also received a master's degree in clinical epidemiology. After fellowship, he served on the faculty of the University of Louisville before becoming to Duke University in 2017. Dr. Smith currently serves as the chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics section on epidemiology, public health, and evidence. Now, at this time, I'd like to welcome my good friend, Dr. Mike Smith. Welcome to The Wright Experience, sir.
Thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you up here, and certainly am a fan of your work and all the work that you're doing to try to help school districts remain safe during this pandemic with all the challenges that we have. So hats off to you for helping us through this trying time, and work's not done, but hopefully we'll see the other side eventually, for real.
Absolutely. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, to be honest with you. But, one of the things that I learned from this is, finding strong partners out in the community. And, it's been a pleasure to get to know you and all the other superintendents in our, in our work group. Right. It's one thing I've learned is finding the right team, and that's critical.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Smith, if you will, we'll jump right into the questions. Tell us about the work that you do at Duke University School of Medicine, and then a little bit about the work also with the ABC Science Collaborative, if you will.
Yeah, so kind of, before COVID existed and was a thing, I'm a pediatrician. I specialize in infectious diseases. So before COVID, that's things like, pneumonia, bone infection. I see patients in the hospital and in our clinic as well. Duke is a big research center. So
Mhm.
one of my research interests is kind of vaccines. So we have the opportunity to be in several vaccine trials and also interested in vaccine safety specifically. So that CISA project that you mentioned is the Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment Program. That's a long-standing program that the CDC has sponsored, for more than a decade. And once COVID came, we were kind of rolled up into that. So kind of the COVID vaccine work is kind of an extension of that. I think we've learned as a group how you treat children with COVID. For us in pediatrics, when you work with kids, um, and you've heard me say this over the past year. The good news is that on average, compared to an older person or adult, children tend to do better with COVID than adults do. And of course, as we all know, children can get sick, children can get hospitalized, children can die from COVID.
Sure.
But one of the challenges for us in pediatrics is, we don't necessarily know that a 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old is going to have the same response to COVID infection or COVID therapies as an older adult does. So
Mhm.
we're involved in lots of trials now. We know some therapeutics that work well in adults. Some of those work well in kids. Some don't. So, but we're learning that. So I think as a group, Duke is doing some really important research in the giving the vaccines to children to make sure they work, studying the safety of vaccines, studying the best way to treat children with COVID. And then, finally, I think, the reason we met is the ABC Science Collaborative, which is it's been an awesome experience to be in, because what the ABC Science Collaborative is, I think for some of your listeners, is, it is a partnership of myself and other faculty here at Duke, here at the University of North Carolina. We started out with districts in North Carolina, 50 plus. At one time, we had 54 districts across the state. Um, and it really allowed us to kind of merge three separate but important goals. Um, One is just pure education. And this is overwhelming at times for me as a pediatric infectious disease doctor. I do this for a living, and things change so quickly. Making sure that teachers, superintendents, parents, everyone who worked in a school setting had some basic information about COVID. So for anyone listening, you can go visit our website. It's abcsciencecollaborative.org. All the materials out there are free for public consumption. Some are a little bit more high tech, but a lot of them are written for, even school age kids and parents. So kind of education is a very important part of the ABC Science Collaborative. The
And that's
second,
abcsciencecollaborative.org. Is that right?
yep, that's right.
Okay. All right.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
the website, and you can always Google it if you can't find it that way.
Okay.
So that's kind of the first goal was really early on in the pandemic. We were getting lots of questions about, what do we do? How should we do this? How should we do these things? Is it safe to be open in person? Is it not safe to be open in person? And a lot of it was really just tapping into our expertise. I know your podcast is about leadership, and we didn't know a lot. So
Right.
one thing that we all learned really quickly is, how do you effectively lead in a time of uncertainty? And
Right.
how do you support people? How do you find that right balance between, things are going to be okay. Children are not as effective as adults, but here are the things you need to be aware of. And that was something that I learned, is to be transparent and honest. We know this, we don't know this. And that's kind of what we do as researchers. And so that gets kind of the second aim of the ABC Science Collaborative, is what can we collectively learn? So education is one thing. As we started to send children back to school, we realized that this was a great opportunity to do some research. And I'm not talking about research in the, let's take kids and experiment with them and kind of give them a new drug, or give them a new vaccine or anything, but what was the shared experience of sending kids back to school across the state? What did we learn? How do we share that with other districts in the state? And what was really exciting is people were really interested to see what we found, and we started partnering, outside of the state. I think now there's several hundred districts in 15 or 20 states across the country that we work with. But that kind of advancing kind of public health knowledge was kind of the aim too. And then of course our third aim was then using the data, once we started to collect data, to actually help school districts make choices about what the best approach was. Is it safe to take our masks off this month, or do we need to stay in kind of mask mandate? What's the impact of testing in school districts? So those three things together, I think it was a win-win-win relationship. We got to make important connections with the community. I think students and teachers and superintendents benefited from having easy access to experts in public health and epidemiology. And then we were able to share this with other people across the country. So that's important in and of itself. And then, of course, if you're an academic like I am, anything you can do to kind of, write a paper and get it published, that's kind of an important metric for us. But sure, it was one of these scenarios where really everyone who was involved in this project benefited.
And it has been extremely beneficial to us as superintendents to have people who at least have the knowledge of the inner workings of what's going on with regards to science and medicine. Because we don't hang around with those folks every day. Enjoy your whole lot, but that's not what we do every day.
Absolutely.
We're educators by trade. So we certainly are appreciative and have been and continue to be very beneficial from interacting with you guys and bouncing stuff off of you and trying to figure out how to navigate this, because there has not been a playbook for this pandemic that we've been dealing with. So, Dr. Smith, it seems that you have a unique combination, and you might tell me it's not unique, but I thought it was, of being a pediatric specialist while also specializing in epidemiology. What advice would you give to parents and community members who are still trying right now to make choices about the pandemic and how to best protect children?
Yeah, so and epidemiology really is the study of disease. So it's kind of a way of thinking. It just happens to be that a lot of diseases are infections. So there are some of us who are infectious diseases and in epidemiology, but it's really a way of studying disease, studying what works and and what doesn't work in terms of preventing and treating COVID. I think probably the most important thing is when you look at, certainly right now, at least at this stage in the pandemic, what types of patients are coming into our hospital, and Duke University Hospital. I'm a pediatrician, but we're kind of what we call a hospital within a hospital. So there's a couple of pediatric floors, but adults come to our hospital as well. And what we're seeing is the vast majority of people who come into the hospital sick with COVID, certainly ICU level sick, and then needing, ventilator support or kind of a breathing tube to help support their lungs, or more additional support than that. It's almost all unvaccinated folks.
Right.
So I think I want to take this opportunity to try to reassure everybody that this vaccine is safe. As I said, I've been fortunate to be involved with the vaccine safety program in the United States. And again, it's not a COVID specific thing. These processes have been in place for decades. It's just, no one's really noticed, because basically if a vaccine is safe, no one cares. That's not a story. That's
right.
That the vaccines are working at what they're doing and they're reducing disease. Of course, when you have a new vaccine, at the population level, people are just more interested, and it's much more newsworthy to know, well, is this product safe or not? And I think what I would want to reassure folks is, first of all, the clinical trials are done. You remember those initial trials in adults involved, 40, 50, 60,000 people. If you were going to see a major side effect, you would see it then.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to see a minor side effect, when I say minor, that's something that happens in, 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million. That's where some of these vaccine safety surveillance things kick in. And, there are national systems in place. The CISA program that I mentioned, there's something called VAERS, and there's something that's called the Vaccine Safety Data Link. I mean, there have been, hundreds of millions of Americans who now have been vaccinated. And we haven't seen really any unexpected side effects. It's like any other vaccine. You get it. Yeah, it might hurt for a day or so. You might have a fever for a day or so. You might have a headache, chills for a day or so, but that's it. So again, as an epidemiologist, looking kind of at the population level, looking at the whole United States, you have hundreds of millions of people who've been vaccinated without any side effects, and that's one thing. So the vaccine's safe. When you look at who's getting sick, it's unvaccinated people. I think that the data, and I'm really a data scientist in epidemiology. The data really support getting this vaccine. So that's the best thing you can do. We can talk about, if COVID comes into a school, how do you prevent it? And certainly we have lots of experience. We've learned about that. But I think the most important thing is just trying to prevent COVID from getting into the school in the first place, and that's by decreasing the population level by getting people vaccinated.
Getting people vaccinated. That's the key. Certainly the key to it. And thank you for that, and thank you for educating us on the safety of the vaccine, because that, of course, has been a question and continues for some reason to be a question. With that. And even though we've seen some vaccinated people maybe getting Omicron or whatever, those numbers are still minuscule, I think, in comparison to those that have been protected from the virus.
Yeah, and remember, the vaccines really are designed to keep you from getting sick,
That's right.
and they're not going to be able to prevent you from getting the infection necessarily. But
Sure.
if you do get Omicron, a lot of the people that I know, and it's been really hard. I mean, kids have been impacted by Omicron. So I have a lot of friends who have had COVID.
Sure.
Their kids have been pretty sick, but my friends who had, the two doses plus the booster, it's like a cold in that setting, as compared to the unvaccinated patients that we see in our hospital who, are quite sick and in the ICU.
So I heard you talk a little bit earlier about the optimism of the future, and it looks, you think we're going to get there and so forth. But what are your predictions? What does your knowledge tell you, studying the data and what have you, about the future of our country with specific relation to COVID-19?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the easy part of that, which is the kind of infectious disease epidemiology.
Right.
I think what our work through the ABC Science Collaborative has shown is that masking and social distancing are very effective ways, but particularly masking, kind of in the school setting. So that, from a scientific perspective, makes me feel very comfortable about, I'm sure there'll be some other variant at some point down the road. The fact that if things slow down and we get to a point where, we all feel more comfortable about reducing the social distancing, reducing the masking, as more and more people get vaccinated, I think that'll be possible. But say, in theory, 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, a new strain comes out that the vaccine doesn't work against. I'm convinced that masking will be a good stopgap. The problem is people are getting tired of the masking and social distancing. And I get that. All I can say is, I promise it works. I promise masking is not, it does not have any negative side effects on us or our children. But I understand that it's not fun, and I'd rather not wear a mask. So I think we're going to get to a point in the coming months where we'll be able to take the mask off. But I know, as a scientist and a public health person, that, in the right setting, so if there's another variant, we may need to put masks back on. I'm pretty convinced that for like my work setting, which is a hospital, which is where people with COVID go when they get sick, we're gonna be wearing masks for a long time. But that kind of makes sense, because the risk for me walking in the hospital is much higher than someone kind of walking down the street and kind of going to school. So again, I know there's lots of issues about kind of personal freedoms and liberties, and I should choose whether I have to wear a mask or not. I should choose whether my child has to wear a mask, and I understand that. And I think we'll get to a point where we're only going to be asking people to wear masks, if it really is necessary from a public health standpoint. I think we were almost to that point. Then Omicron happened, and with Omicron, at least this week, I'm not ready to say, okay, it's safe to stop masking. But as cases go down, we may be there in several weeks to months. Not saying we won't ever have to go back to it again, but that makes me feel better that we know how it works. And the other cool thing that I want to mention is these vaccines, mRNA vaccines had not really been used at the population level before. So mRNA is the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. But the technology has been around for a long time. And in fact, I mentioned at the beginning that we do vaccine trials here at Duke. We had just started an mRNA trial for a different virus about 6 months before COVID hit. So that technology is there. That technology is safe. But if there is another variant that for which the current vaccines don't work very well, you can actually take the mRNA from that variant and pretty quickly create a new COVID vaccine.
Okay.
I mean, it's like the USB stuff on your laptop. They actually, some people call this kind of plug and play technology. As long as you find the genetic code, you can create a new vaccine. So I think knowing that even if COVID comes back, with a new variant, we can quickly pivot to a new vaccine. I'm sure you've read in the media, there are Omicron vaccines that are in the works. Hopefully those won't be needed because by the time, they're ready to go, Omicron will go away, but we can make new vaccines. We can go back to masks if we need to. So I think we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about how to manage COVID. And that makes me feel, much more optimistic, both as an individual, as a parent, and as a physician.
And one of the things that I heard you say that I want to reiterate, you said to us that you feel like there could come a time where we may be able to get away from masks, even if we have to go back to them. But to reiterate, now is not that time. We still need to be masking when we are in schools, in public settings, and things of that nature. And that's William's opinion now, if you agree with that, of course. But I just don't think we're quite ready, particularly in some communities yet.
Yeah, correct. That's what I would say. I'd say certainly where I live, in central North Carolina, I think North Carolina, I didn't ask you ahead of time kind of how wide this reaches. There may be parts of the country where you can have those conversations now, but no, not this week, not next week. Maybe in a month or so, we could revisit those. And, in our group, the ABC Science Collaborative is working on kind of what are the best metrics to know whether it's safe or not. And obviously the number one thing is, well, how much COVID is out there? And the number two thing is, in your setting, whether that's your school, your community, or whatever, how many people are vaccinated. So I think it would be a combination of those, those two things.
Okay. Thank you. So Dr. Smith, let me let you peek into a classroom here for a minute. So we've got a teacher, just as a scenario here. What advice would you give to education professionals, specifically teachers, as they're trying to navigate classrooms with a combination of vaccinated and unvaccinated students? Unfortunately, we've still got that challenge right now. So what would you say to them?
Yeah. So, and I think this gets back to your point. Right now, I would encourage everyone. Well, first of all, if get vaccinated if you can yourself, and if you're interested. I mean, the vaccine is safe, and that's really the best way to protect you from having a severe COVID infection. So, if you're vaccinated, that should make you feel a lot better about being around students who may or may not be vaccinated. And again, just to echo the last point. In the middle of Omicron now, at least here in North Carolina, encourage you to keep wearing the mask. That's going to protect you from transmitting to other people if you're sick, but also it does protect you to some extent. So if you're vaccinated and wearing a mask, again, it's not zero, but it's probably between a 1% and 2% chance, meaning that when we look at the school setting, the likelihood of transmission from a student to a teacher is very, very low, somewhere around the order between 1% and 2%, maybe a little bit higher than that with Omicron. We're still kind of crunching those numbers, but certainly all of last year, and even with the Delta wave, which kind of hit during the summer, the numbers never really got more than 3% secondary transmission. I guess that's something important to talk about. The metric we use is kind of secondary transmission, which is in the school setting. There's going to be a student who picked up COVID in the community, from playing with friends, from going to church, from going to the supermarket, whatever. I think what we focused on when we work with schools is what the school can control is the likelihood of transmission kind of within the school setting.
Right.
And secondary rates of transmission, certainly if you're masked, are low. That's the number I'm talking about. That's the kind of 1 to 2%, and it's even safer if people are vaccinated.
Gotcha. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. So moving forward, children, in my opinion, will need a lot of guidance about how to proceed from a physical as well as a mental health perspective. I'm asking you to put your pediatrics hat on for a minute here. So how do we help them get that guidance?
Yeah, so it's a challenging time. It's interesting. So I have one preschooler who's too young to be vaccinated, but they're at a preschool that they mask inside. They don't mask outside when they're playing. They mask inside except when they're napping, and he's a champion at it, and I'm amazed. I think the younger you are, the kind of the more normal this is. So I do worry that as the younger kids grow up, they may not be ready to be unmasked, and and ironically, taking the mask off might be what causes the stress, kind of for the younger kids who are who kind of started their school years with the mask. So that's something that's not talked about a lot, but that's going to be one stressor. I think older children, teenagers, adolescents, the conversation that I've had, and as I mentioned, we've done some of the vaccine clinical trials here at Duke, and I've had the opportunity to ask some of the older teenagers, at least, so why do you want to be in this trial? And I've gotten some really remarkable, mature answers, which is, I've not been able to control anything in the last 2 years, but I can help make this vaccine possible by being in the study, and I can help my community, and I can help other people. And I think that same message will work for masking. Is okay. I know it's not fun. I don't want to wear a mask, but by wearing a mask, you are not only protecting yourself, you're protecting everyone else around you. And I think empowering kids. We don't often give kids enough credit that they want to do the right thing and they want to help. And I think that's the angle to take talking with people. In my personal opinion, as I said, I have a preschooler and an older child. I don't have as much experience in the middle ages, but again, I think this notion that we're all in this together is something that most kids will understand.
Yeah, I spoke to a group of people about that very subject, and I said, it's time for us to be our brother's keeper. Even if I think I'm invincible and doing whatever, I need to mask because it's my responsibility also to help others. So I don't know if that worked, but that's the message that came to mind for that group. So Dr. Smith, the work that you do and others like you as a medical professional is so critical, especially in today's times. What things do you think, if any, sometimes get overlooked with regards to the medical profession?
Well, there's a lot. I'm trying to think which way I should answer answer that question.
When they ask me that about education, I have trouble too trying to narrow it down, but there you go.
I think one thing that I've learned throughout this pandemic, and it's true for my colleagues as well, is we have lots of degrees and we did lots of training, but we're regular people. We make mistakes sometimes. I've done more media requests and talking onto the radio and and podcasts like this, on TV, and in the last year and a half, I have the rest of my life together. And after a long day, sometimes you flub things, sometimes you say things that might not come out right. So I think just have patience and understand that it's not just the doctors. I mean, I'm here. I'm an academic physician, so I think I have the best job in the world because I get to see patients, but I also get to do research. My colleagues who are physicians who, are working 10, 12-hour shifts day in, day out during the pandemic, understand that people are working their tails off to keep us all safe, and and there's a lot of burnout. So please understand, give us patience, and I would say the other way around too. As a medical community, it's very easy to take the message I said before, which is, hey, when you walk around our ICU, it's the unvaccinated people who are taking up the beds, who are the sicker, who are the ventilation. And that's true. That's a statement of fact. But I don't mean that in a way to shame anybody or direct anger against those folks. I think it's our job as the medical community to engage with people to convince them that vaccines are safe. I mean, that's part of my job. So I think just as I would ask, if you see someone not wearing a mask and everyone else is wearing a mask, try not to get filled with hate for that person. Understand that they may have different circumstances, and and you kind of have to respect that. So I think be patient with everybody, including us in medicine. I will say many of my colleagues are getting burnt out, and I really wish Omicron weren't here. I think there was a time where I thought this was going to end, and we're all tired. Right. So if you talk to a physician or really anyone else in this time, just try not to lose that general human compassion.
Wonderful, wonderful. So my follow-up question might be an interesting one after that answer. If there are people in our audience who aspire to go into the field or the profession, if you will, of pediatric care, what advice would you give them other than wait until the pandemic? No, I'm just kidding. What advice would you give them?
It's awesome.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
I think educators and my dad was a high school science teacher.
I remember you telling us that, right?
And and he always said he took his first job and never left. And so I got that from, and he was a biology teacher. So I think I got the kind of, he'd bring the microscope and I look under stuff. I'm like, oh, that stuff's kind of cool. So it's not surprising that I ended up in infectious diseases. And it's not surprising that, I'm at an academic center where I get to do research, but also teach kind of the next generation of physicians. Sure. But I think educators and pediatricians are similar in that we get the notion that we really do have the opportunity to shape and influence the next generation of leaders. That 3-year-old who I'm seeing in the ICU, and they call me in the middle of the night and say, "Hey, Dr. Smith, this kid's not doing great. What antibiotics do you want to start?" That person could go on to be a senator, could go on to be the president, could do whatnot, and that's really the fun part of the job.
Sure.
And I think educators get that as well. And I think for me, what I love, in addition to kind of the 3 areas of kind of what I say my adult job, which is patient care, education, and research, it's when I have a patient in front of me, you kind of pivot between, in the hospital, for instance, I'm talking to the medical team about, hey, did you a very sophisticated discussion about, the latest publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I think we should be doing this. And then you go in and you talk to the family and kind of try to explain what's going on in layman's terms. And then, I'm not shy about getting on the floor, taking my tie off, kind of playing with the kid and kind of getting an exam and things like that. So it's just a lot of fun because it's challenging. You get the academic challenge, you get the reward of working with children and talking to their families. So pediatrics is great. It is a subspecialty though. So you first need to go to medical school. Sure. And kind of, like everything else in life, which is mostly focused on adults. But I will say, I once became a jazz musician. I was a trombonist through college and almost moved to New York to do that as a career. I was convinced that music and jazz is something that I could always do on the side, but I probably couldn't be a professional musician and take care of patients at the same time. So, right. Medicine is not what I would say. Everyone's going to medicine. You don't. It's not about hardcore science. Yes, I'm talking about research now, but kind of the humanities are really important. And studying literature, understanding music, understanding how to communicate with other people is just as important. So, don't think if you don't love science, that doesn't mean you shouldn't go into medicine.
Okay. I've not heard that
like before. It a little bit. You can't not like it at all.
Right.
But,
sure.
You don't have to be like a science major or or anything like that.
Okay. Okay. So communication is key even in what you do and being able to relate to the human soul. I think I heard
Yeah,
that
because
as
that's
well.
what it's all about. And can
Sure.
you understand what's going on with your patient,
Sure.
or
Sure.
not? What's your symptoms? And that's hard in pediatrics sometimes. I'll be honest, because the little ones can't talk. But
Right.
yeah, no, I was a Spanish major in college, and I worked as an interpreter at the local
How
medical
about that?
center, and I realized, okay, well, I'm translating what the doctor is saying from English into Spanish so they can understand what's going on. But even if you have someone who speaks perfect English fluently, they're not going to understand the medical English. So it really
Sure.
hit me that being able to explain things in a way that people can understand is 90% of good medicine, I think.
Of a good word. And 90% of educational leadership, any kind of human services, I think
Right.
is certainly the key. So, Dr. Smith, if a parent approached you, because I get this question all the time, so I'm going to give it to you, and asked you about traveling with kids. I want to take a trip to see grandmama in, Las Vegas, wherever grandmama lives. What would you tell them?
Yeah, so I would say you have to weigh the risks and benefits of kind of what's in the travel. I will say, and are you vaccinated? The same themes here. Are
Sure.
you vaccinated? Are your kids vaccinated? Can they be vaccinated? So my youngest is less than 5, not eligible for vaccine. We've not been on a plane as a family. We've driven
Sure.
places. We've driven to places where we've been in crowds, but we've just not been on a plane. Um, I think if you're vaccinated and wearing a mask, being on a plane, I know people who that's been their exposure getting on a plane. I think you know. Regardless of COVID, the airline industry is having lots of delays and stuff, so you might want to drive anyway. I think everything else is kind of what's your risk tolerance, right? Certainly,
Sure.
um, your risk is never going to be zero. If it's a long lost relative who you haven't seen in a long time, especially if they're getting elderly and that you don't have much time to be with them, you have to kind of weigh the risks and benefits. I don't think I don't think I would say do not get on a plane. I would say if you're going to go on a plane, please be careful. Make sure you wear a mask. Make sure everyone who's eligible to be vaccinated gets vaccinated. And if you're going to see someone who has a weak immune system or things like that, can consider getting a test before you actually step into their house.
Okay. 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 Thank you very much for that. Dr. Smith, this pretty much exhausts my questions. Is there anything else that I've left off that you might want to share with our audience that I might have forgotten to ask you?
I don't think so. I think between your questions and kind of my having some talking points I wanted to rope into my answers, I think we covered a lot of stuff. And again, what I would say is, it's been such an honor and pleasure to work with you.
Thank you.
Just to kind of bring this back circle, it's the ABC Science Collaborative, which means
Sure.
collaboration, which means working with other people. That's the way we're going to get out of this pandemic. It's doctors working with teachers and superintendents. It's, I'm not from here. I'm not a big ACC fan, but you see the ABC Collaborative, it's Duke working with UNC. Some people are like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. It's us in North Carolina working with other researchers across the country to come
Right.
together and beat this thing. So I just want to leave you with that and say, show compassion, be willing to reach out with others, and together we're going to get through this.
Thank you very much. If you'll hold on with me for a minute, Dr. Smith, we'll come back and close out the show.
Okay, great.
This month, the Wright Experience is celebrating its 1-year anniversary. I'm proud to state that we have many, many followers, and they're growing by the week. And for that, I'm extremely grateful to you. I ask that you continue to spread the word about the work that we're doing. I'm also extremely grateful for all of these amazing responses I continue to receive. Please keep them coming. February 10th, 2022, my guest will be Dr. William Bill Harrison, who is a retired North Carolina school superintendent who served for many years in many districts. Dr. Harrison also served the students and staff for the state of North Carolina as a state-level instructional leader for years under the leadership of Governor Perdue at the time. He currently serves as a college professor at that other state university that Dr. Smith didn't name, North Carolina State, and also as a consultant for many of today's superintendents and other instructional leaders. I look absolutely forward to the experience also of interviewing and talking with him on next week. Dr. Smith, I want to thank you very much for being my guest. I absolutely admire and respect your leadership, and I appreciate your willingness to be a part of the Wright experience and give us some valuable and important knowledge that we can learn from and use to get better. And thank you for the work that you do as a medical professional, as a researcher, as a collaborator with us as superintendents. There is absolutely no doubt, and this isn't a shameless plug, it probably sounds like it, but there's absolutely no doubt that we were better able to serve our students and staff and are even now because of the interactions with you and the guidance and the reassurance and listening to me in particular, but us vent and not sure how we're going to do this and so forth. So please know and understand that I appreciate you and the wonderful work that you and the collaborative did to help us. We're certainly going to keep your name and number in the Rolodex and quick access because this work is not over, and we certainly appreciate you and all that you do.
Well, thanks so much.
To the Wright Experience audience, thank you for watching.